Okay, let's set the scene. The year is 39 AD. We want you to just imagine for a second, you're standing there on the Palatine Hill in Rome, and the air, it's thick. It's not just, the usual city smells. There's this metallic tang of fierce sweat coming off the senators standing near you.
And mixed with that, this incredibly heavy, musky perfume, expensive stuff clinging to all the silk drapes of the palace.
You hear sounds, too. There's this constant noise, marble cracking. It's because of these frantic, nonstop renovations happening.
Right, and the clatter of statues being moved around, golden statues, and they all look like one man.
That man is the emperor, Gaius Julius Caesar Augustus Germanicus. History knows him better as Caligula.
Yeah, little boot. That nickname came from the soldiers who loved him when he was just a kid, tagging along with his father on campaign.
So you're watching this emperor, he's barely in his mid-20s, and he's like casually stroking his favorite horse, Incitatus.
The famous horse.
And at the same time, he's leaning over this polished table, just discussing which of your colleagues, which senators, should be executed next. Their crime, insufficient worship.
It's chilling. Governance isn't governance anymore. It's become this really bizarre, hypersexualized, terrifying theater, and he's the director.
That whole scene, which comes straight from the sources you sent us, it really sets the stage for this deep dive, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. Our mission today is really to unpack that transformation. How did Caligula, this kid everyone loved, little boots, turn into this tyrant?
A tyrant who demanded people worship him as a living god, who mixed political power with these incredibly extreme sexual rituals and degradation.
Exactly. We're looking at how absolute power can just corrupt absolutely, turning leadership into something monstrous.
So the big question we need to tackle is, how did that unlimited authority turn Roman governance into, well, a theater of degradation? And maybe more importantly, what were the psychological roots? What drove him to behave like this?
It's such a crucial question. Because understanding Caligula, I think, helps us understand the inherent dangers of unchecked power, even today. It's not just ancient history.
Right. Okay, let's dive into section 1 then. The promise he showed initially, and then the psychological shift.
So he's born in 12 AD, and his family, it's basically Roman royalty. His father was Germanicus, a hugely popular general.
A war hero.
Definitely. And his mother, Agrippina the Elder, granddaughter of the first emperor, Augustus. So the pedigree was, impeccable. He was destined for the top.
And that nickname, Caligula, little boot, it came from the soldiers on the German frontier, right? They made him tiny military boots.
Yeah, he was like their little mascot. Adorable kid, apparently. He represented hope, the Julian line, everything good after some difficult years. The army adored him, and that set the stage for how the whole empire initially felt.
So when he actually becomes emperor in 37 AD, there's this massive wave of optimism. People are thrilled, especially after Tiberius, his predecessor, who'd become really paranoid and withdrawn.
Tiberius's later years were dark. So Caligula arrives, and his first moves, they're brilliant, politically speaking. Textbook good emperor stuff.
Like what specifically?
Well, first off, he frees all the political prisoners Tiberius had locked up. He publicly burns the records from old treason trials, basically wiping the slate clean.
That's a huge signal.
A massive one. Then he restores democratic elections to the assemblies, giving power back that emperors had been taking away. And crucially, he hands out big bonuses.
Money talks.
Always. Generous bonuses to the Praetorian Guard, his bodyguards, and to the citizens of Rome. Secures loyalty right off the bat. For the first year, everyone thinks, finally, a good one. Generous, fair, principled.
Okay, so if he starts out so well, the promising young leader, what happens? What flips the switch? The sources all point to this moment in 38 AD.
The illness. Yeah, a mysterious, really severe illness. He almost died.
And while he recovered physically, the account suggests something broke. Psychologically, maybe neurologically.
That's the big debate, isn't it? Was it epilepsy? Encephalitis from a fever? We don't know the exact medical cause. But the effect, the psychological change, was profound and, frankly, terrifying.
People around him noticed things weren't right.
Definitely. Palace servants started reporting really strange behavior after he recovered. His eyes, they'd just fixate on nothing, wide open for minutes at a time.
Creepy.
And his lips would move like he was having these intense, silent conversations with people who weren't there.
Okay, wow. So when he comes back into public life, he's different.
Fundamentally different. The sources are clear on this, that earlier calculation, the political smarts, gone. replaced by, and this is the phrase they use, an unsettling mixture of paranoia and divine grandiosity.
Divine grandiosity, so he stops trying to govern Rome.
And starts performing as a god. The illness seems to have completely shattered his connection to normal reality. He wasn't just blessed by the gods anymore. In his mind, he was one of them.
Which leads us right into section 2.
Yeah.
Building himself up as a god and using public humiliation as a tool.
Yeah, and this wasn't subtle. Previous emperors, like Augustus, played this careful game. Divine blessing, maybe deification after death. Caligula just smashed those boundaries. He insisted he was ruling as a god right now.
And he made sure everyone knew it. The cult of self, as the sources call it.
Immediate and total. He orders temples all over the empire to rip out the statues of the traditional gods, Jupiter, Mars, Venus, you name it, and replace them with statues of himself.
Okay, standard tyrant stuff maybe, but there was a twist, right? Something about the heads.
This is where it gets uniquely Caligulan. The statues had to have interchangeable heads.
Interchangeable heads. Why? Like, what's the point of that?
Because, according to him, his divine look needed updating. It had to match the seasons or maybe reflect which god he felt like embodying that week.
So if he's feeling like Jupiter in the spring, they put on the Jupiter-style Caligula head.
Exactly. If it's summer and he's channeling Venus, on goes the more beautiful, perhaps slightly more effeminate head. He was a living, evolving, fashionable deity. It's this bizarre mix of absolute power and, like, high-maintenance theater.
But it wasn't just a public show, was it? He was practicing this god thing in private, too.
Oh, absolutely. That's maybe even weirder. In his private rooms on the Palatine Hill, he built these personal shrines. And guards posted outside would report hearing him inside, having loud conversations with the statues of Jupiter, Mars, Venus.
Like actual arguments?
Yeah.
Or just talking?
Both. Arguing, pleading, sometimes bursting out laughing, apparently at cosmic jokes only he and the statues understood. It was like he was workshopping his divinity, convincing himself through these private performances.
And this is where the political control gets really twisted together with his personal compulsions. His godhood wasn't separate from his power over people.
No, he merged them completely. He set up this cult of imperial worship, and participation wasn't optional, especially for the elite. Senators, their wives, they had to take part in these ceremonies.
Ceremonies designed to break them.
Precisely, to blur the lines between political loyalty and, frankly, sexual submission. It was about shattering their pride, their sense of honor.
There's that one really disturbing example from 39 AD, the wife of Senator Marcus Junius Brutus.
Yeah, Brutus, from one of the oldest, most respected families in Rome. Caligula forced his wife to strip naked in front of this huge golden statue of himself.
Stripping wasn't enough, though.
No. While naked, she had to recite prayers. Prayers that were normally reserved only for Venus, the goddess of love and beauty.
So he's making the highest-ranking women offer their devotion, their sexuality, directly to him, represented by the statue, not just to the state, but to his person.
It's absolute humiliation. He's saying, I own your husband's career, his political future, and I own his wife's dignity, his family honor. It's total domination.
And this spills over into everyday life, right? Like, even dinner parties became part of this performance.
Oh, the dinner parties were legendary. He kept this rotating cast of married women from the top families at his table.
And the selection wasn't about, like, attraction.
Not primarily, no. Often he seemed to pick women whose husbands were powerful, men he wanted to intimidate or break. Their role at dinner was pure display. Humiliation theater.
How so? What would happen?
He'd seat them however he felt like, sometimes literally at his feet, like pets. Other times he'd make them serve wine, maybe wearing clothes that were deliberately revealing or degrading.
And the husbands just had to sit there.
They had to sit there and pretend everything was normal. Carry on conversations about grain shortages or troop movements while their wives are being openly degraded nearby.
The story about Marcus Lepidus is just excruciating.
It really is. And remember, Lepidus wasn't just some senator. He was a respected statesman, married to Caligula's own sister, Drusilla, who Caligula was obsessed with.
So Lepidus is at dinner, trying to talk policy.
While Caligula is right there, openly touching, fondling Drusilla, Lepidus' wife, just feet away from him.
Hi, Lepidus.
The sources say he just stared straight ahead, fixed eye contact with whoever was speaking about, port taxes or whatever, jaw clenched, completely refusing to acknowledge what was happening to his wife right next to him.
It wasn't just random cruelty then. It was staged. He needed people to see it.
Exactly. He seemed almost incapable of feeling powerful or maybe even sexually satisfied unless he had an audience watching his dominance. Every private act became a public declaration. My desires trump everything, your laws, your honor, your marriage. That need for witnesses is key to his psychology.
That need for witnesses, for performance, takes us deeper into the darkness in Section 3, the extremes of intimate power and death. We're talking incest, rituals involving the dead, linking executions to sexual pleasure.
Yeah, it gets incredibly dark. His relationships with his three sisters, Agrippina, Drusilla, and Julia Levilla, were widely reported as incestuous. But his connection with Drusilla was something else. It was intense, obsessive.
And when she died in 38 AD, his reaction was extreme, even for an emperor.
Way beyond the norm. Okay, he declared her a goddess, set up a cult for her. That happens sometimes. But his personal mourning was pathological.
How so?
Palace staff reported finding him in her old rooms constantly, just sitting there for days, talking out loud.
Talking to who?
To her things. Her clothes, her jewelry, her makeup jars. He'd arrange them like she was about to use them, then tell him about his day, his political plans like he expected her to answer. It wasn't just grief. It felt like he was trying to perform her back into existence, or at least keep her present for himself.
And then there are the even more disturbing reports about what happened before her funeral.
Right. Now, some of these sources were written later by enemies, so we have to be a bit cautious. But they claim he delayed her burial for several days to conduct private ceremonies. Rituals that allegedly combined religious rites with something disturbingly intimate. Necrophilia isn't quite the right word. Maybe necrocentric worship.
What did that involve?
Anointing her corpse with oils, reciting passionate love poems to her body, but also telling her his political strategies. It was like he couldn't accept her death as an ending, only as a change in their relationship state. He needed to keep possessing her, worshiping her, even in death. It shocked even Roman society, which was pretty jaded.
That idea of treating death not as an end but as another stage, it seems connected to how he handled executions, too.
Directly connected. He wasn't content just signing death warrants. He often insisted on being personally involved in the final moments of his enemies.
Going way beyond just watching an execution.
Far beyond. He seemed to deliberately fuse the act of killing the ultimate expression of his power with his own sexual arousal.
The case of Senator Gnaeus Piso in 40 AD stands out.
It's probably the most chilling documented example. Piso was accused of conspiracy. Instead of a public execution or even a private cell, Caligula had him brought to his personal, luxurious bathhouse.
The setting itself is part of the performance. Steam, marble, luxury.
Exactly, the perfect stage. And Caligula was there, reportedly wearing nothing but gold jewelry and a laurel crown. And he personally tortured Piso.
But it wasn't just torture.
No. The accounts claim he alternated between inflicting pain on Piso and pleasuring himself, openly. As if the senator's suffering and his own orgasm were two parts of the same ritual. The power to kill and the power to feel pleasure became one and the same act for him.
It's like the ultimate performance of dominance made physical, fatal, and deeply personal.
It wasn't about justice anymore or even making an example. It was about internalizing death dealing as a source of personal sexual satisfaction. Proof that his power was absolute over life, death, and pleasure itself.
And this need for intimate, violent spectacle wasn't just behind closed doors. He brought it into the public arena, didn't he? The gladiatorial games.
Yeah, he twisted even those, which were already brutal, let's be clear, but he made them extensions of his own private appetites. He'd have specific gladiators brought right up to his private viewing box while they were fighting. He wanted them bleeding and struggling just feet away from him.
Why so close?
The sources say it was so he could masturbate while watching them. The smell of their blood and sweat, the sounds of their exertion, it all mingled with his own sexual excitement. It was a sensory overload of violence and arousal, orchestrated just for him.
But maybe the most systematic cruelty in the arena was what he did to the aristocratic women.
The forced combat. Yes. This was truly twisted. These weren't criminals or trained fighters. These were the wives and daughters of senators, the elite of the elite.
And he made them fight.
Forced them to fight against professional gladiators, often with minimal armor, which just emphasized their vulnerability, sexualized their terror and their suffering.
And where would he be during this?
Right at the edge of the arena. Close enough to see the fear in their eyes, hear them gasp for breath, and, crucially, watch the reactions of their husbands and fathers in the stands, forced to witness this degradation.
It's psychological warfare on a grand scale.
Absolutely. Humiliate the women publicly and you break the spirit of the men. It was a clear message. Your status means nothing. Your family honor means nothing. I can make your daughter bleed for my entertainment. I own you.
Which brings us to Section 4. Trying to understand the psychology behind all this. Because this behavior, the incest, the death rituals, the sexualized violence, it doesn't just appear out of thin air.
Yeah.
It has roots.
Deep roots. And you have to look at his childhood. It was steeped in trauma and fear. His father, Germanicus, died suddenly when Caligula was only 7, almost certainly poisoned.
Probably on orders connected to Tiberius, the emperor.
That was the strong suspicion, yes.
Yeah.
Then his mother, Agrippina, was banished, exiled, and eventually starved to death in prison. His older brothers met similar fates.
So as a child, he's suddenly orphaned, politically vulnerable, surrounded by enemies who destroyed his family.
Utterly alone and unprotected in the snake pit of the imperial court. And who takes him in? The Emperor Tiberius himself. Deeply paranoid, deeply troubled Tiberius.
Who spent his last years basically hiding on the island of Capri.
Right. And the sources are pretty clear that Caligula, as a teenager, was there on Capri, witnessing Tiberius's legendary debaucheries.
Debaucheries that involved more than just excess.
Much more. We're talking about an environment of complete moral collapse. Power expressed through bizarre, often cruel sexual acts. There are infamous stories about Tiberius using children, the scintiae, as sexual playthings during these elaborate, perverse parties.
So Caligula learned early, didn't he? That absolute power means absolute freedom from any kind of normal rules or morality. Cruelty wasn't the exception. It was the language of power.
He learned it firsthand. Degradation was how you showed dominance. There are reports from that time of the teenage Caligula practicing his public speaking skills, while slaves were being tortured nearby, specifically for his viewing pleasure.
So he learned to connect making speeches, wielding power, with watching people suffer.
Exactly. Power, performance, and pain all got fused together in his mind. When he became emperor himself at 24, he didn't have to invent cruelty. He just took the lessons he learned from Tiberius on Capri and applied them with his own unique, manic, and increasingly God-complex-fueled creativity.
His marriage to his last wife, Caesonia, seems really significant here too. She wasn't from a top family, wasn't considered a great beauty, but they had this intense bond.
Yeah, they married in 39 AD, and she stayed with him until the end. The sources paint her not just as someone who tolerated his extremes, but as someone who actively encouraged them, an enabler, maybe even a co-conspirator.
A partner in his dark theater.
That's a good way to put it. She allegedly helped him design some of the most humiliating rituals for the aristocracy, suggested ways to make them more psychologically damaging, more exciting for him. She seemed to understand what he needed and helped him get it.
Even their wedding was part of this pattern, wasn't it? Breaking down public and private barriers.
Oh, completely. It wasn't a private affair. It was this days-long public spectacle. Dozens of noble families were forced to attend and, crucially, forced to witness the consummation.
The actual consummation.
On a platform built in the palace courtyard for everyone to see. Senators, their wives, arranged in circles, forbidden to look away. The message couldn't be clearer. There is no privacy, no dignity left, not even in marriage. I control everything.
And Caesonia, the sources suggest, she enjoyed this power.
Seemed to thrive on it. They suggest she took pleasure in orchestrating these humiliations, sometimes pointing out new victims, maybe the wives of men who weren't showing enough enthusiasm for Caligula's divinity. She amplified his impulses and gave them political teeth. And then their daughter, Julia Drusilla, born in 39 AD, she immediately becomes part of his ritual world too.
In what way? Not just doting father stuff.
Far from it. He'd hold these elaborate ceremonies celebrating the baby's divine nature. He'd hold the naked infant up, talk about her future as a goddess.
Okay, weird, but maybe just emperor ego.
It gets worse. The sources claim these ceremonies often ended with Caligula performing sexual acts while still holding the baby.
What? Why?
He seemed to genuinely believe her divine presence amplified his own power, his virility. She was like a living fetish object, a tiny goddess totem confirming his own godhood through these bizarre rituals.
Deeply disturbing.
He even commissioned statues of himself and the baby together. The poses were apparently so shocking, so suggestive, that even the sculptors men used to Roman excess were deeply disturbed by what they were being asked to create.
Beyond his wife and child, there was another intimate circle, right?
Oh.
The young male slaves.
Yes, a constantly changing group. They served him sexually, but also, weirdly, as confidants. He'd apparently share his deepest fears and delusions with them.
So they were the closest people to him and also the most vulnerable.
Exactly. Paradoxical position.
Yeah.
We have this testimony from one slave named Marcus who served him before being executed himself around 40 AD. It gives us a rare peek into Caligula's mind.
What did Marcus reveal?
Caligula's intense fear of assassination, which was constant. His absolute conviction that God spoke to him directly. And this core belief that sexual conquest, dominating someone sexually, was the purest, most effective form of political control.
Did Marcus describe any specific rituals?
Yes, these nighttime sessions. Caligula would make the slave dress up as different gods, Jupiter, Apollo, whoever. Then Caligula would deliver these long, rambling speeches about his own divinity, his plans, his fears, alternating this with intense sexual activity. It was like therapy, political strategy, religious observance, and sexual release all rolled into one bizarre, terrifying package.
And to make sure everyone felt this constant pressure, this lack of safety, he even used architecture.
He weaponized architecture, yeah. He ordered massive renovations to the palace, specifically to break down the walls literally between public staterooms and his private chambers.
So wait, a senator could be in a meeting about, say, taxes.
And suddenly find the room opening up into Caligula's bedroom, or find themselves witnessing an impromptu torture session or an intimate encounter happening right there.
The point was deliberate chaos.
Deliberate uncertainty, fluidity. Political talks could morph into sexual exhibitions and back again without any warning. Imagine being a visiting ambassador trying to negotiate a treaty while Caligula is occupied nearby.
It keeps everyone completely off balance, totally anxious.
That was precisely the goal. Eliminate predictability. Make it impossible for the elite to rely on normal social rules or even physical space. They were kept in this constant state the sources call anxious uncertainty, never knowing if they were there for state business or to be unwilling voyeurs in his private theater. Crippling.
And he ramped this up even further with actual scripted performances.
Oh, yes. He would commission playwrights to write short scripts, little dramas, specifically featuring certain senators and their wives or family members.
Fix about what?
Often themes of betrayal, humiliation, maybe forced reconciliation, and then he'd force the actual people named in the script to perform it for him.
Perform their own humiliation
Or
while he watched.
While he watched, often while he was, again, pleasuring himself. There's one documented case involving a senator, Lucius Vitellius, and his wife, Plotia.
What did they have to do?
They had to perform a scripted dialogue about her supposed infidelity, and as they delivered the lines, they had to gradually undress and then engage in sexual acts, all according to Caligula's detailed stage directions.
That's incredibly sadistic. It's not just forcing actions, it's forcing the words, too.
Exactly. It's psychologically sophisticated in its cruelty, making them say things that endorse their own degradation, maybe even lines expressing pleasure. It breaks down internal resistance in a way simple force can't. It makes them complicit in their own abuse, a much deeper wound.
Okay, so this brings us to Section 5, the end. How does this reign of terror finally collapse?
Predictably, perhaps, the very people tasked with protecting him, the Praetorian Guard, eventually couldn't take it anymore.
Because they were exposed to all this.
Constantly. Their role blurred. Were they bodyguards? Or were they just part of the mandatory audience for these rituals, sometimes maybe even participants? It eroded their sense of duty, their morale.
And the leader of the plot was one of them.
Cassius Chaerea, a centurion in the guard, a soldier chosen for loyalty. But after months, years of witnessing Caligula's private behavior up close, he decided assassination was the only way out. He called it divine madness.
So it wasn't really about policy disputes, it was about the psychological strain.
Chaerea apparently described it as the psychological impossibility of continuing to serve. The constant exposure to the sexualized cruelty, the degradation, it just became unbearable. They had to stop the performance.
And the assassination itself in 41 AD. The location was significant, wasn't it?
Very significant. They didn't kill him in the palace courtyard or the forum. They cornered him in a narrow, dark, underground passage. A service tunnel, basically, connecting the palace to the theater. To kill him away from any audience. The man whose entire sense of power seemed tied to having witnesses died alone, unseen, in a dingy corridor, stripped of his final performance.
And then immediately after, they did something unusual. They didn't just kill the emperor.
No. The conspirators went straight to the palace and killed Caesonia, his wife, and their baby daughter, Julia Drusilla.
A total cleansing. Why?
It suggests they saw the whole family unit, the whole ritualistic system Caligula had built with Caesonia's help, as a kind of contagion, a corruption so deep it had to be completely wiped out. It wasn't just removing a tyrant, it was trying to excise the divine madness and its legacy, including the potential heir.
Now, we do have to acknowledge the potential bias in the sources. Most accounts were written by senators, people who hated him, who benefited from his death. Could they have just made up the worst parts? Exaggerated everything for propaganda?
That's the essential question for historians, always. And yes, undoubtedly, some elements were sensationalized, exaggerated for effect. That's likely. But the sheer consistency across different sources that sometimes disagree on other things, is telling. The specificity of the accounts, the interchangeable heads, the rituals with Piso, the forced performances, they aren't just generic claims of debauchery. They paint a very particular, internally consistent picture of someone systematically using sex, humiliation, and divine pretense as tools of power. Most historians today believe that while details might be embellished, the fundamental pattern of behavior is probably accurate.
And this pattern, it didn't die with Caligula, did it? The sources suggest it's something we see repeated.
Unfortunately, yes. You see echoes of these behaviors in many situations, ancient and modern, where individuals get absolute, unchecked power combined with isolation.
Like where?
Think of certain corporate CEOs who rule their companies like fiefdoms, some military commanders in isolated posts, political dictators, cult leaders, anywhere where oversight breaks down and one person's whims become law.
You see the same patterns. Blurring lines, demanding loyalty that borders on worship, using humiliation, sometimes sexualized, to control subordinates, demanding witnesses.
Exactly. The combination of that total authority and the lack of accountability seems to reliably warp psychology in similar ways. Caligula is an extreme ancient example, but the dynamics he embodies are disturbingly timeless.
So if we try to boil this all down, the key takeaway from this deep dive.
I think it's that Caligula's use of sex and degradation wasn't just about personal kicks, though he surely got those. It was a deliberate, systematic strategy, a tool of governance, a method of psychological control.
He transformed intimacy, sex, family honor, even religious practice into expressions of his absolute imperial dominance. He didn't just want people to obey him. He wanted them broken, complicit in their own humiliation.
Precisely. He wanted to shatter their inner world as completely as he controlled their outer lives.
Which leads us to that final provocative thought for you, the listener, to chew on.
If history, with Caligula as a prime example, shows this recurring pattern that absolute unchecked power so often weaponizes human sexuality, turning it into a tool for cruelty and control, what does that tell us about protecting ourselves today?
What specific checks, what kinds of accountability are most essential in our modern world, in politics, of business, anywhere power concentrates to safeguard human dignity?
Is it just about laws and institutions, or does it require something more? A cultural commitment maybe to transparency, to ensuring no one operates with the kind of total power, the unwatched privacy that allowed Caligula to turn his palace into a stage for horrors. Something to think about.